You're listening to Real and Raw Adoptee Talks with Emma Greenslade.
Hello and welcome to today's show. I'm Emma Greenslade from Real and Raw Adoptee Talks, and I am talking today with Fiona Miles. Welcome, Fiona.
Hi there, nice to be here.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, had a busy morning, but it's all settled now.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to our talk. We've got a real good one today, folks. So Fiona was born as Helen and adopted at 8 or 9 months old after being in foster care and hospital.
Mm-hmm.
She struggled with the emotional carnage that being told you're adopted can bring. We all know that, don't we? Mm-hmm. Labelled as naughty, unruly, and at one time evil. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
By the time she was 17, already her life had spiraled into alcohol and drug addiction, hanging with all the wrong people to try and feel accepted and fit in. Doing ridiculous things to be part of whatever crowd she had latched onto. 12 years of out of control living until she became a Christian. And I'm wondering if that made everything better. But it helped her to get enough balance to start looking at why she was so deeply distressed. Sitting on an even keel for many years, she then had the opportunity to adopt her great niece from the family she was adopted out of. This caused a huge wave of really deeply looking at her own adoption and dealing with the never-ending feelings of unworthiness and pain. Fiona has written 3 books to date, with a 4th in the pipeline, all centred around adoption. And she discovered that she had suffered from adoption trauma. So Fiona is now on a mission to help other adoptees help manage their feelings and find a new confidence in themselves. So today's show is This Is Me, I'm Adopted. So here we go. Do you want to add anything into that and introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm glad of the opportunity to be able to, bring, my kind of outlook on my adoption and the adoption thing all together, because I think sometimes as adoptees we can be kind of unheard, and feel that there's a time now where we can just come out of that box and start being heard, and for people to start listening. Is in particular, the social services and whatever, as to the traumas that adoptees really can face.
Yeah, I think it's a really important time, and we've got so many great platforms that we are able to give our voice out there so people can start listening. So Thank you so much for being here. So what age, you were adopted and around 8-9 months old?
Yeah.
So what were the circumstances that you became adopted?
Well, interestingly, I tracked down my biological mother in the 80s because I had a physical condition that I kept being asked that annoying question of, is there anything in your family? And I was like, I don't know. So I decided that was why I wanted to find her, really, so that we could just put that to bed as to whether it was something that was wrong in general or whatever. So she let me know that she hadn't wanted to give me up. There was a story as long as your arm about it all and stuff like that. And then, I had a genuinely good relationship with her for a long time, well, until she died, really. And then when I got my little girl, I really started to look into adoption and all that it can bring, because I really didn't want her to start feeling the way that I did. So I never knew that you could have your adoption files. Didn't even know what an adoption file was. I'd never been told as a child, never thought about it. So I sent away for my adoption files, and from them, it was very clear that my biological mother had just dumped me in the hospital, had just left me there. And then it reads like her sister tried to take me on, but couldn't manage, and I've ended up in the hospital and stuff like that. And then I've gone into foster care because she couldn't have me or didn't want me. So that was that, So I kind of went through a long time of the, oh, she did want me, wasn't that nice, and she couldn't keep me. And then slam dunked just recently, at the end of last year it was, and to realise that everything she told me hadn't been entirely true, including who my biological dad was. So I have now found him as well, which is...
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting 2022.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you only got your adoption files last year, did you?
Yeah, November last year. Yeah, I had no idea. I think because I was born in the early 60s in the middle of nowhere, I kind of, when I found out about them, I thought, oh, they're never going to have them, in that kind of place. So, yeah, it took them a while to find them, but they found them.
That's amazing. So perhaps for our listeners, you could give some insight into how you went about getting those adoption files, because I read quite regularly that people are struggling to get their files, they don't know where to go. So how did you go about that?
Well, basically, I knew that I'd been born in a small town in Scotland, so I approached their social services and spoke to someone there, and they put me on to the right number. And then I started dealing with this lady who, she taught me through the process, and she said that I would need to have counselling and stuff like that before I got my files. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. But for some reason or another, that never happened. And the files were just sent to me without any... Yeah, they just, came in an email. So I was like, okay. So I opened the files, and it was old-fashioned letters. It was pieces of paper, handwritten in old style writing. Like people had just scrawled stuff on. Some were typed and whatever. So it was really quite... it was devastating in the first instance to find out straight away on the first piece of paper that I wasn't made by the same man as she told me. That was the first sort of bit and I was like, what? So I had to kind of stop, take a breath, put it away for a couple of days, think about that, and then look at the rest of it and see how did all this come about and whatever. So it was really interesting, but for whatever reason, the way that I got my files probably shouldn't have happened like that. I should have had the counselling, but I don't know whether it was just a mix-up or something. I don't know, but it doesn't matter.
You got them, yeah. So when I got mine, I actually went to the children's home that I went to before I was adopted, and they got hold of them. And so the first time I went, I was given a book. And I can't think what it was called. And then I was given my files, and are you okay? and that I think that was the counselling.
Right.
And I think I was just, I was stunned that just that I had this information, and I was in my late 20s, and information about my birth mother and what she was like. So was that they did like a personality thing? Was that the same on yours?
There was a little thing, a little list, and it kind of, it was just one word, like about her eyes, her hair, her personality seems nice. Okay, that's not telling me much.
Oh, comical. So did your father know, when you met him this year? Well, obviously, he knew about, did he know about you?
Well, unfortunately, he'd actually passed away 10 years ago, so I had to deal with the fact that, he died as well. So his children, the daughters in particular, I've been in good contact with them, and they said that when he used to be maybe a bit merry, after a night out, he would say things like, oh, you never know, there might be a sister or something come out of the woodwork one day. And they used to just laugh at him because he was a bit of a joker. He used to just, he used to like a bit of a carry on, apparently. So when it all came to, because I found my biological family through ancestry DNA. So when I got in touch with the daughter, she straight away did a DNA test without any hesitation, and she said she just knew, that I was her sister. So that was very easy. I think I've had a very easy ride, in as much as some people have great difficulty finding their biological parents, whereas I had no problem finding my biological mother, and I had no problem finding my biological dad, which was really, it's quite unusual sometimes. I think people have an awful time finding, their biological parents.
It can be very difficult, can't it? And quite frustrating that it's taking so long, and yet some of us find so easily and quickly. Yeah. So how many siblings do you have?
In total, with the siblings I was brought up with, and Maggie, my biological, and Norman, there's 15 altogether.
Wow, what an extended family.
Yeah, it's quite wow.
So you've got 2 siblings that are full siblings, have you?
I have no siblings that are full siblings, because none of Maggie's children were made by the same father, and obviously, Norman only had his kids. I'm the only one he had with Maggie. So, yeah.
And were any of your siblings adopted, or was
No.
it just you?
No, it's only me. Like, I had an older sister that was kept. She'd already had her, and her parents were bringing her up. And so when I came along, obviously in the early 60s, it was kind of like, oh my God, she's done it again. It was pretty frowned upon, even for her having the one, and then to go and do it again.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why she was more inclined to just leave me at the hospital. You know what I mean?
So she didn't leave you at the hospital because of this medical condition?
No, she basically had said at the hospital that she wasn't keeping me, so I was left there. So I don't know what they do when you're left. You probably put in with all the other babies, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a program recently on, I don't know, I'm going to say iPlayer, about a girl who was left at the hospital, but she didn't know, she was just left there. She didn't know who. Have you seen that program?
Was that like the abandoned babies? What are they called?
Yeah.
The foundlings.
Yeah, well, that's what they're called, isn't it? But they followed her story of trying to find. It was a documentary trying to find her family. So, did you ever get to meet your mother?
Yes.
Your birth mother.
Yeah, I met my birth mother in the 80s. She had moved away to London, but she came up to Scotland. Like, my mum and dad actually drove me to go and meet her, which they were very supportive, because they realised that, a lot of my, angst and whatever was a lot to do with being adopted. So they were quite happy to support me, and they drove me there. There was no mobile phones then, but they stayed in the town, and they said they would be at this designated spot until 4 o'clock. And if I didn't like her, because I was staying the night, you see, because it was so far away, they said they would be there. If I didn't like her, I could just make my way back to where they were, and they would take me home. So it was fine. I got on fine with her. It was very one of those moments where you walk into a room, and her mother was sitting there as well. So there was the granny and Maggie, and they both looked like me. They had similar features, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at her. It was quite interesting, the feelings that I felt. I can't say I felt these kind of, oh, there's my mummy, because I had a mum, But there, there's this person that had me, and then of course she started to tell me all the whys and the wherefores, which she probably thought I wanted to hear, which was better than the real story, I suppose. So yeah, so I mean, it was a very ordinary relationship,
Right. So you didn't turn up at 4 o'clock to go back with your parents? You got on with her, did you?
Yeah, I stayed the whole weekend, and she went away back to London. I went away back. I was living in Glasgow at the time, and then I had a lot of sort of thought about it, and we had a bit of communication, and I ended up moving down to London to meet the sisters. There was two sisters then and a brother, and to spend a bit more time getting to know her. So,
and did you manage to form a relationship?
Yeah, but like I said, we had a very good relationship. It was a good sort of stable relationship. She we would call each other. And I would go and visit her. She would visit me and stuff like that. It was very normal, I would say.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, really nice. So, did you grow up as an only child, or did you have other brothers and sisters that you were growing up with?
No, I grew up in the middle. I was a middle child. My mum and dad had my older brother. He was 4 years older than me, and then they adopted me, and then they had my little sister. So I was in the middle of two of their own children, which I know I am their own child, but we all know as soon as you're told you're adopted, instantly you can see the difference. I started to really notice the difference between me and my brother, me and my sister. And in the middle, here was this little kid with fuzzy hair and glasses, funny teeth, and these two sort of perfect kids that looked like their mum and dad. And like my sister and brother were very clever. They were like in the top range of the classes, and I was kind of skittering around the bottom range. So there was a big difference, definitely. And behaviour wise, they were very well behaved, whereas I, in my madness, was just causing as much trouble as I could.
So how old were you when you were told you were adopted?
Well, my mum and dad always told me from I was 2-year-old. They said they were advised to just keep telling me that I was adopted, chosen, special. I hate those words, and all the rest of it. And then about 6, I would say, that's when it sort of sunk in.
When you went to primary school.
Yeah, probably. I just remember being told. I remember sitting in the sink. We had big Belfast sinks. We lived in the country. Sitting in the sink getting a bath, I suppose. And I remember her telling me. And I remember thinking to myself, what is she talking about? And I noticed that she had holes in her ears, and she had just poured out all her heart telling me about being adopted and chosen and special and all that. And she said, I looked at her and asked her, what's them holes in your ears for? I was like, I know I was listening because I can remember her telling me it, but yeah, that was my answer.
Funny. And so how did you cope with the news, or did you really comprehend it?
I think I would say it must have gone in, and I must have started, realising I was different, because I then began to, not really like being there. I remember thinking, I need to get back where I belong. I need to get back, and I kept having this thing that, I'd been taken rather than, being chosen. I suppose I changed the adjective in my head to I must have been taken away, So, I remember my thoughts being very mixed up, and I was never able to kind of articulate what I was feeling, to mum and dad, because if I did kind of try and bring it up, it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was poo-pooed, but it was always kind of put in a way like, no, you're ours now, and that person, you mustn't try and think about that too much. And that just made me worse. Whereas if I'd had some real answers, and I think being in the country and it being the time it was, there was no social worker brought in. There was nobody brought in to try and talk me through it or help me through it. And it was something that you didn't go to school and kind of go, MD else adopted. Can you help me here? You know, it was something I didn't share at school. I didn't tell anybody I was adopted because I didn't want anybody, you know, to think I was different, because I was really getting to that place where I thought, I'm a bit different anyway. I'm not really enjoying this.
Yeah, so it was quite confusing then.
Yeah, it was. I found it quite difficult. You know, there was seasons where life would go on in a normal family. I was brought up in a very normal, loving family, and you know, you would fight with your brother, you would fight with your sister, which all families do. But then for me, there would be this little trail of stuff going on. You know, starting to feel different, starting to feel, you know, and when I started to get into trouble and get in a row, it was always because I thought I got punished more because I wasn't theirs, which wasn't true, because I got punished more because I was really bad, you know. But in my head, it was kind of like, well, I'm getting this punishments more because I'm not theirs. Even though I knew I was theirs, but I knew I wasn't. It was a very confusing time, and it is, I think, for children to understand that you are this parent's child because they're bringing you up, but you belong somewhere else. I think for any child to have to manage that information, even with support, it is such a head nip, you know.
Yeah.
And with no support, my brain just exploded. And then hormones jumped into play. You know, I became sort of hormonal quite early. I was about 11. And so I just went right off the rails. I just couldn't handle myself, couldn't handle anything really.
So that's when you started, you know, so those from 6 to 11, you know, your years were starting to be shaped by your thoughts essentially, and your beliefs about yourself and about your parents and about the world around you, which is only natural. But like you say, so mind-blowing for a child to try and comprehend this whole setup that the adults have decided for you, which and not being able to articulate in a way that a child can understand it.
It's very, and even today, I think, even in these days where there is more going on for adoptees, it's still a massive life-changing thing to have to find out that you're not your parents' child. I just find it absolutely incredible that it's, you know, and like one of the things I kind of battled for with my little one was that she has contact with her family. You know, she goes to her grannies, you know, she goes to nanas and whatever, and she knows where she comes from. So although she knows that she's not ours, it's not such a big deal for her because she does know, you know, where she came from, kind of thing.
And how old is she?
She's 7 this week.
Oh.
Yeah, she's an absolute firecracker. I call her my little tornado because she does have, she has trauma, she has attachment issues, she has a lot of things going on, but, you know, I've had to battle though. The battle to get her therapy, the battle to get her what she needs has been fierce. You know, I've really had to be like a lioness, you know. And
we are. We're warrior mamas. I mean, I've got 2 children and I've needed to get them help, and you know, it's a struggle regardless. But I think with being adopted, it's finding somebody who is able to help with that, because there's so many services that just aren't available for that, or aren't able to help adopted people, and they're kind of just shoved to the sides and, you know, oh, you get on with it. Well, you do get on with it, but like you found and I've found, it has its comeuppances when you get to teenage years. So is was the drugs and alcohol your way of dealing with it?
Yeah, more I would say for me what happened was I went off in the big wide world, went into a living job because I got nothing at school, and my mum and dad were like, "You're not staying here any longer. You can go and earn a living. Go and live in somewhere. You're not staying here." So off I went to a hotel, lived in there. But I was always getting into trouble, so I left a few times and came home and I got shipped off to another place. And then in one place, there was sort of a lot of older staff living in, and we started drinking and whatever, and they were kind of realising that I was this country bumpkin, didn't know what I was doing, and I got they filled me full of a lot of alcohol, and then one of the older guys took me back to his room and I was raped, and that was like my first ever I'd never had sex before. So for me, I was like, how did that happen? How do I deal with it? I didn't feel that I could deal with it because I'd been labelled such a naughty kid, naughty teenager, flung out of school, and like lies and stealing and all the rest of it had been a sort of major part of growing up. And I've found through a lot of research that a lot of adopted kids lie and steal and do the things, but there's a reasoning behind an adoptee doing it. So I kind of felt like I couldn't say anything because I kind of felt like I put myself in that position. So from there, things that I couldn't handle it. So I started drinking more and then moved on to somewhere else, got into more trouble. I was attacked in London, different things started happening. So the drugs and alcohol really were helping me to manage the stuff that I couldn't say in a way. So it was like I was just like, I just need to damp my head down, and keep my head at a level. And it just went on like that for quite a long time.
So disassociating, numbing your feelings and your emotions, and just basically general avoidance.
Absolutely.
And the more, I can understand this because I was the same. And the more shit that happens, the more you just avoid it.
I'm not here.
And until eventually something cracks, doesn't it? So what was your awakening for you?
I would say my cracking point was basically I was having seizures and stuff, and I was getting hospitalised, and they kept saying to me, you need to stop this, you need to stop drinking, you need to stop doing what you're doing, because you could have a seizure and not come out of it. You could have a stroke, whatever. And I was like, okay. So I had to start thinking about, what am I doing? And I need to, sort of calm down a bit. And in that season, we had this little woman used to come round the houses with the Clean Easy book. And she was always poodling about, and a few other things happened, within, our family. My sister lost a baby. The baby was full term, but he had, is it spina bifida? He'd had a thing in the brain, and he had to be born, but he'd already died. So that was quite traumatic. So my sister asked me to go to her church, because I never went to church or anything. She said, you go to my church and thank the minister for looking after us when we were at York Hill at the Children's Hospital in Scotland. I was like, are you kidding? I said, everybody knows me in this town. I can't go to a church. And she was like, you'll need to go for me because I can't go myself. And I was like, all right then. So I went, and I remember sitting and thinking, this is highly boring sitting here, and it was uncomfortable and all the rest of it. So I duly thanked the minister on the way out and whatever. But going home, I started thinking about things. I was like, gosh, is there anything out there and whatever? I didn't believe in anything. We weren't brought up really believing in much. And then this girl that floated about our street, I shouted to her one day and I said, here, do you go to a church? Because I thought, I don't want to go back to that church because it was boring. And I said to her, did you go to church? And she said, yeah. So long story short, she took me to her church, and it was a sort of Pentecostal place with a small P. It was lively but not over the top. Yeah. And something happened to me in that service, and I can't explain it except to say that I believe that God touched me, and that's all that's about it. And I never looked back from that. I kept going, to the church. And I can't say I had this wonderful epiphany and I stopped drinking and taking drugs immediately, because I didn't. It was a process of going and realising, this is not good for me, learning different things, meeting different people and whatever, and then, just staying on that path. And the balance came in as much as I began to look at, why had I been raped, and getting the sort of healing from that pain. Why had I been attacked? Why had I lost a baby? Why had this happened? And getting the healing over a good long period of time of one thing after another. So the balance came. I felt fairly normal, blah, blah, blah. But realising, when it came to getting my daughter, realising very quickly that although I'd been a Christian and had dealt with all this stuff and worked with loads and loads of women, thousands of women I've seen coming off of drugs and alcohol through the same process and whatever, I realised the adoption stuff's not been looked at. You've managed to sort out all this stuff that messed up your whole life, but you've not looked at that. And I thought, well, and that's when the sort of groundwork as to, well, can I get adoption counselling? No, I can't. What a minefield that is. There's just not stuff out there. There are people out there that can maybe help and, help you with different things in different areas, but there's not readily available adoption counselling, especially for older adoptees. Well, I couldn't find much, and I live in a huge city. So I thought, okay, what is the overarching feeling that I have over my adoption? What is that overarching feeling? And for me, I boiled it down to a grief. I've lost something. I lost my mum. I lost my connection. It was like a grief. Everything I looked at, it was grief. Something was lost, taken away. You can't get back and all the rest of it. So I looked up and I found a very good grief counsellor. And I went through grief counselling for a good few months. And that really worked for me. The stuff that and I explained to her I was adopted and why I'd chosen grief counselling and whatever. And she had a few other, counselling things under her sleeve that she helped me with and whatever. So that for me really helped me to unpack an awful lot of the feelings that I'd never been. I was an emotional mess for months. I mean, really, I was like, you couldn't even speak to me and I was bursting into tears. I couldn't talk about it. I'm bursting into tears and whatever. But it was doing what it needed to do, and it was revealing and showing me, the stuff that hadn't been resolved for 50 years. It was just incredible. So that kind of, the weight, it was like this big sack of boulders had been lifted off. And I suddenly became this new person, because I've always been fairly backroom kind of person, never put myself out front. Like I would never have done anything like this. I would never have kind of been on in any way, shape or form up front, So I kind of got a new confidence in who I was. This is who you are, regardless of the fact you've been adopted. Regardless of the fact, all the stuff that's happened to you, this is you. This is who you are, Fiona Miles. Yes, this is me, I'm adopted. Yes, this is me, no darkness too deep. I've been there, done that, and now I'm out the other side of it. So then began this kind of journey into studying as much as I could about, about adoption stuff. And that's when I kind of stumbled across adoption trauma. And I really looked into that. I read an awful lot about it, looked at it, and I was like, wow, so many facets of adoption trauma. And the things I've read really resonated with the way I behaved as a child. And I was like, wow, I wasn't bad. I wasn't evil. I was suffering from trauma that nobody could understand, that nobody could identify, because what hadn't really been identified. And if it had, maybe in a city somewhere, but certainly not in my little village that didn't even have a bus route or a shop or anything. So that was a bit of a revelation. So the more I looked into that, I then went and had some trauma counselling, because
Okay.
although it was adoption trauma, I would, in my opinion, and it's not everybody's opinion, trauma is trauma, you know. So I went and had trauma counselling. I had 6 weeks of that, and that again, it wasn't as emotional as the grief counselling, I have to say, but it certainly put some bricks into place. You know, it put some stuff into place where my head then could, you know, I'm a bit of a processor, so I was able to box stuff off. You know, I was able to shut some drawers that were lying open, you know, and spewing out stuff all the time. I was able to shut them, and it was like, wow, that noise is, that box is shut. You know, that's not coming out anymore. So for me, that revelation in itself again gave me this bigger impetus to think to myself, right, I need to do something about this. I need to help other adoptees like myself that are older, that just don't know why they can't move forward, why they can't get out of the rut they're in, why they can't, you know, do the things they want to do. And I was like, wow, you know, the revelations all round were just pretty spectacular for me. And so that's why I then began, you know, I did therapeutic parenting training, which actually taught me a bit about myself as well. And it helped with my little one, you know, we parent her. Because I think as a parent, you tend to parent as you were parented. And I was parented like 50 years ago, where it was like you got a smack round the head and told to shut up. Do you know what I mean? Or you got dragged up the stairs by your hair, you know what I mean? So, and flung in your room. So it's like, no, we can't parent like that, you know. So I did all these parenting courses to help with parenting my little one the best way possible for where she's at, you know. So I've learned a lot. I was in it. I was like, my little one goes to a special needs school because she has other problems as well. But I was in the taxi going to get her, and I was telling the taxi driver, I said, you know what? I said, I have learned more in the past 6 years than I did in the 50 years before it.
Wow. Yes. I think that children do that. What I've noticed through my own parenting is that when my children get to a certain age, more so with the older one, that something is triggered of when I was at that age,
Yeah.
and for me to just explore that and
Yeah.
go a little bit deeper with it, which is kind of how I got into the work that I do. I mean, I wasn't as lucky to find any counsellors that I got on with, and so much so, you know, I was actually attacked by one, not physically attacked, but verbally attacked by a counsellor. And then another counsellor said, no, your adoption's got nothing to do with your problems. And so I did try, but what
Yeah.
led me to being a coach for adopted people was from my own experience and my own unpacking and my own deep navigation of my own emotions,
Yeah.
and wanting to help other adopted people to move forwards. I think
Yeah.
that's essentially it. What I found with counselling, it kind of kept me stuck in that pain, whereas what I wanted to do was move forwards to a life that I actually wanted.
Yeah.
And so that's really amazing that, you know, you followed your own breadcrumbs, probably through the grief counselling and the trauma counselling, and, you know, just found your own way. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is just being able to find resources that are going to be able to help you move forwards.
Yeah.
You know, I use essential oils a lot. And I work with the emotions, and I have a little blend that I use and sell literally just for grief.
Yeah.
And how that, I think the grief is so poignant because we've not been told that well, we don't feel that we've got the grief. We haven't really understood that. We haven't essentially, you know, we always think of grief as around bereavement.
Yeah.
But actually, this is a different type of grief, and loss being so key.
It's the biggest loss that you can have, I think, to be, you know, taken away from, you know, where you were made, I suppose, because essentially you've spent all that time being nurtured, nourished by your mother, you know, and then you're given birth to, and then that separation, you know, when we're separated from, like when my grandparents died, there was a separation that's manageable because they're old and you knew they were going to die. It's sad, you work through it. But the being separated like that from your mother, whether she wanted you or not, you know, I don't think there's anything that can be likened to that. You know, I'm not sure if there's anything that you could say, oh, well, that's a bit like that, or that's a bit like that. I don't think there's anything like that, you know, and then you're left. Everyone has their own story, but then to be left on your own in a hospital, you know, taken by someone else and then taken back to that hospital, then, you know, given to someone else, and then off you go to your forever family and you have to live happily ever after, you know. I think it's like, how does a baby deal with all that separation, you know, from a very young age? And like our daughter, one of the saddest things that I was told, because when we got her, we were all very ecstatic, and because we haven't got children, I've never been able to have children. So when we got her, for us it was like, we have a child, and we're, you know, she's from my family and whatever, and she's, you know, she's going to know where she came from, and it was all lovely, you know, I thought it was just wonderful. And then when she was actually brought here, the social worker was talking to us, and she said, you know, you do realise that this is her biggest trauma. And I was like, what? She was like, because she was removed at birth, so she had that trauma, you know, and then she was placed in a foster carer, and she was there until she was 13 months old. So for her to then be taken away from that safety, security, and dumped, you know, hundreds of miles away in our house with strangers, when I realised what that could have done to her, you know, it was just amazing, that realising that trauma that such a little baby could be going through and unable to express itself, you know. So it's kind of like, it's almost I don't know how the word is. It's very hard to put into words what adoptees have to feel, because we have to feel it, because it's ours to feel.
But do we feel it? Because the ego is all about survival, and the body we're there to survive. So to feel that would mean that we potentially might not survive. So we numb those feelings out, so we keep alive.
Right. I know I felt feelings, you know, when I was young. And I know I felt bereft. I felt, you know, not part of stuff. I felt different. You know, the feelings that I felt maybe wasn't feeling trauma or grief, because I wouldn't have been able to identify them, but I knew I was feeling things that I couldn't put I couldn't express, you know, because you know, children were seen and not heard, you know, in my kind of era. Regardless of whether I was able to express it or not, I probably wouldn't have been allowed to. So, you know, and I know that watching my own child, I see her presenting behaviours that I know she's feeling something, but she doesn't know what it is. She can't express that, you know. So I suppose in a way those feelings then get packed away And for me, that's where all those sort of filing cabinets were, with the open drawers, you know, feelings, emotions, all spewing out all the time. In inappropriate points of my life or in meetings at work, I'd be like, oh, you know, these inappropriate feelings would come out, you know, and whatever. So it's kind of like, because you don't know where to put them until you do know where to put them, until you get the right counselling, until you meet the right person, the right, you know, yeah, you have to meet the right counsellor, the right person that's going to be able to lead you or show you or you know, counsel you into that place where you can then manage what you've had going on. Because I wouldn't say, and it's only my opinion, you know, I wouldn't say it would ever completely go away, because it's something that is inherently within you, because it's happened and there's no unhappening it. You can't unhappen that rip, you know, that tear away from, you know, your natural parents. So that can never be repaired, because although you meet them in adulthood, there's still that thing, you know, it's like those polar opposites where you can't actually get that connection because you don't belong there either, you know. And that's something I felt quite strongly, was I didn't belong. My pups just fell off the back of the couch. I never felt that complete connection there either, because I wasn't brought up with them. They didn't know me, you know, they didn't know who I was, they didn't know how I reacted and things like that. So it's kind of like I think that there's such a vast array of stuff that we need. We need more people like you, and we need more people like me that can help other adoptees to look at what they need to look at, you know, to find ways of you know, easing the stuff that they're going through and being able to manage themselves so that they can go forward and do the things they've always dreamed of doing.
Yeah, and that's about unpacking those feelings that have been numbed. The way that I describe it, my metaphor, is that actually we are these big kind of, you know, imagine us being a stately home. That's what our body is, these huge big palaces. And we have, you know, there's lots of lights within that building, and it's got lots of different rooms, and we can see all those lights from space. And as we go through light, you know, when we are born, all our lights are on, and as we go through life, things happen, and gradually those lights get dimmed and turned off, and then the door gets closed until we're kind of just, you know, with this dimmed building, and so my work is about getting all those lights turned back on again, so you can shine your light, so you can be who you want to be and have a strong identity. But also all those happenings through life are generally stored in the unconscious. They're memories that we can't call upon immediately. You can call on some of them. Some of our things were very conscious, but a lot of the deep happenings, because of the survival, our body and our mind pushes them down, and that's where the triggers are, you know, where all those things, the triggers that we get upset about are stored. So with my work, I can find the exact time that the memory is stored, and with whom, and how it kind of happens, and we can just literally pull it out by the root. And that's another thing, is we're taken away from our birth family, and we're pulled by the root, essentially, aren't we? And we're like this, you know, what those the sycamore, is it the sycamore where you've got the two, that's how I imagine it, the leaves that fly off, and you know, we're just swirling around, and we haven't actually managed to root somewhere permanently. We just and so until we can ground ourselves and become energetically attached to the earth, we're always going to be wondering who we are.
Wondering and wandering.
Wondering and wandering, yes. Yeah, so true. So you have adopted your great niece from the family you're adopted out of, and how did that all come about?
Well, it came about. When my biological mum died, there was a bit of an estrangement between the sisters and whatever, and so that she was obviously the linchpin that kept the communication with us going. So there was a long time where we didn't really communicate. We saw each other on Facebook probably, and then I got an inbox from one of my sisters saying the other one had become a Christian and was getting baptized, and she thought because I was a Christian I would want to know about it. And I was like, oh right, that's nice. And I thought, oh, why don't I just go up and surprise her, just turn up, and not seen each other for years. So I did all that, and then I stayed the night with her that night, and she started to tell me about her son. Obviously his partner had this baby. The baby had been in care since it was born, and there was none of them were able to take her on because she had been born with some difficulties. She'd had a brain hemorrhage. They didn't think she'd be able to walk. There wasn't much hope for that she would be able to do much at all anyway. So I came home, spoke to my husband, and we said, right, we'll apply for her. But we thought really that we wouldn't get her on a kinship order because not legally anything to do with her, to be honest. So we went through all the processes thinking it probably would come to nothing, but it actually came to fruition because eventually she was placed with us, and it was quite incredible. And for me, it was almost like the most amazing thing that could happen because she would have gone away and been adopted by somebody else who wouldn't have known who she was, and she would have been called something else, and whatever, and all the stuff. So for me, it was kind of like, well, we can, let her know where she comes from, and she can meet her mummy and meet her daddy, and, and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, mummy has died and daddy's not sure where he is, but she sees her nanas and her cousins and her sisters and all the rest of it. So she has what I would say the best recipe for an adopted kid, because she's not going to wonder who she is, because any question she has, I can say to her, well, my mummy called Maggie used to do that, or you look like your nana when you do that. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of stuff like that just makes the difference, and will make the difference for her.
Having an identity and understanding belonging.
Yeah.
And I think those key points of the expressions and how you stand and mannerisms.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how I remember looking at my mother, and she always used to raise her forehead, so I used to copy her doing that. And I just wanted to find, and I didn't realize I was doing that, but I was just trying to find things that I would copy. And now when I listen to my sister, she sounds very much like my mother. Whereas we have the same tone because we were brought up in the same area, same as you've got an accent, a Scottish accent. But I think like when my sister coughs, when she's got a cold, she sounds just like my mum. Whereas I don't. And I think I've probably got more. That's become more noticeable as I've got older.
Yeah.
So So I think that's an amazing, wonderful thing that you've done, and keeping all those lines of communication open for her is really good. Yeah, I love it. So you've written some books.
I did.
This is me, No Darkness Too Deep, and
That's
this is me, I'm Adopted. So which one came first?
This is me, No Darkness Too Deep came first, because that's basically my kind of story, in as much as, you know, where I came from and whatever, and then going off out into the big wide world, and I talk about some of the really bad things that happened to me. You know, a lot of people that have read it have, because they know me now and never knew me before, they're like, I don't believe it, you know. And I get a lot of emails and stuff from people who have followed a similar path and got themselves into similar situations, and again, as an adoptee, not feeling able to talk about stuff, you know, and that things have happened to you, and because they've been, you know, a bit of a mess as a child and stuff like that. So I think it's done a lot of good, and I've actually, interestingly, had more feedback than I expected from adoptive parents who are just blown away at how an adopted child can feel. Because, you know, when you're going into adoption, you know, I didn't go into adoption with the same thing, but I think adoptive parents need more instruction and understanding as to what they're actually taking on.
Yeah.
You know, and how to best manage some of the stuff that may, you know, happen with their child, you know, because obviously they're adopting because they can't have children, or they may be adopting because they want to extend their family or do a good thing, you know, for a poor child, which is all nice and all the rest of it, but more instruction needs to be given to adoptive parents from adoptees, you know, and a range of adoptees. My story is not the same as yours, and it won't be the same as anybody else's that listens to this. So, you know, they need to maybe get a range of adoptees who are willing to sit with adoptive parents and talk about, you know, how they felt as an adoptee, you know, so that the parent gets a better understanding that if the child goes a bit wonky, they haven't picked a bad kid. You know, the child's got a bit wonky because it's been ripped away from it's where it's supposed to be, you know. So I think that's something I'm kind of trying to campaign for over here. Yeah, I've got a few appointments coming up for going into schools to talk to teachers about, you know, how it is for an adoptee at school, or how it can be, because we're not all the same, but it's identifying behaviours in certain kids that are, you know, you can pinpoint the reason to the trauma that they've experienced, rather than labelling them and putting them in the, you know, the B class because they're naughty. They're actually not naughty, they're traumatised. They need specialist intervention, you know, because, you know, when that intervention's happened, then they can, if it happens early enough, hopefully they can move on and be the clever little kid that they're meant to be, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I wish you the best of luck with that, because schools are so underfunded, and finding, you know, even if you could just do that in your local area, that would just be amazing.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is put your details of how to buy the books and where to buy the books, because I can see you're doing a 2-book special for both of in the This Is Me range, and then you've got some adoption merchandise that's available, and how to find you. So I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. I'm also going to put in the show notes about how people can work with me, how adopted people can work with me, and come into my free course, which is called Limited to Limitless, the Foundations. And that's totally free. And that's basically getting yourself set up. So even if you're going through counselling, or if you decide to do coaching and to go and to heal those deep traumas, getting yourself set up so you are able to navigate that and make sure that you've got the self-care. All going to go in the show notes. Thank you so much, Fiona, for coming on Real and Raw Adoptee Talks.
No problem. It's been lovely talking to you.
I've really enjoyed having you, and thank you very much for listening.
You're listening to Real and Raw Adoptee Talks with Emma Greenslade.